After the evacuation, a lot of people did not know where their children or mothers were, because citizens were evacuated to different places. Some people were brought to villages and settlements and chose to stay there, and some people immediately got tickets to travel onwards to their relatives elsewhere. On the second or third day, I think, I offered to organize an information group within the government commission. I invited 2 or 3 experienced journalists to it. They had to gather the needed information about the medical, technical, and radioactive situation from the specialists in a quantity they needed, be it full or partial, deal with imprecisions when we, ourselves, didn't have enough information. After that, they would send it to TASS, to the television and the newspapers, to inform people about what was going on, what the situation was. This wasn't rejected, but as far as I know, even now, no such information group has been created. On the 2nd of May, the Government Commission was already in Chernobyl. Nikolai Ivanovich Ryzhkov and Egor Kuzmich Ligachev arrived at the exclusion zone. Their arrival had a great significance. One day prior to their arrival, the Government Commission had decided to continue the evacuation from an area within 30 kilometers radius around the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. This decision was based on a prediction of radioactivity spreading and analysis of current situation on the eve of 2nd of May. After our high-ranked guests had arrived, they deliberately started their visit from the places where evacuees had been placed. Then, on the 2nd of May, they took part in the meeting carried out in the Chernobyl Regional Party Committee, together with Comrade Sherbitsky, who was here for the first time. Before that, the entire Ukraine government was very actively and successfully represented by the Ukraine chairman, Deputy Nikolaev. This was a very important meeting. Firstly, thanks to our reports, and I was a reporter, they understood the situation, understood that this was not an average accident, but a high-scale disaster that will have long-term consequences, and that enormous amounts of work would be required to continue the localization of the 4th block, as well as decontaminate the area and to build a shelter for the wrecked 4th block. An assessment of the situation was also needed, as well as considering the reactivation of the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd blocks, and finally analyze the possibility of continuing the construction of 5th and 6th blocks. These questions were drafted out then. We also spotted an increase in radiation levels in Kiev and other cities which were quite some distance away from Chernobyl. The party members and the government were quite worried about all of this. That is why they came to personally sort these matters out at the location. After we had described the situation, the pivotal decisions were made. These decisions determined the entire order of organizational work for the rest of the period. The scale of the work, how all the organizations and the government itself perceived it. The operative group led by Nikolai Ivanovich Ryzhkov was created, and almost the entire Soviet industry was allocated to the disaster. From that moment on, the Government Commission became only an administrative mechanism for that huge government work that was done under the control of the operative group of the Central Committee. The operative group held regular meetings in which they discussed about the radiation levels at each measurement point, all the details about the task being performed. In other words, I didn't know any big or small event that the operative group of the Politic Bureau didn't know about. Besides Nikolai Ivanovich Ryzhkov, the operative group consisted of Yegor Kuzmich Ligachev, Comrade Sherbitsky, Comrade Vorodnikov, Comrade Vlasov, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Vladimir Ivanovich Dolchik, secretary of the CCPSU, who on behalf of the Central Committee supervised all the events performed within the Chernobyl nuclear power plant and in atom energetics as a whole. As it seemed to me, he was doing that 24/7 without leaving aside his other assigned tasks. I must say that at multiple times that I attended the operative group meetings, these meetings were held in a very calm and conservative manner. They tried as much as they could to base their decisions on a specialist's point of view. However, they also compared what many specialists say. In summary, for me, it was an example of a correctly set up workflow. You know, I couldn't even assume that the operative group will make such strong-willed, purposeful decisions. These decisions were targeted solely to deal with the situation faster, lessen the consequences. The work was like a well-organized science team. First, carefully studying the available information. Ideally, the information was obtained from multiple sources, and there were cases when the military had provided information that was different from what the civil services had given. This was especially the case for the radioactive outbursts in the fourth block. Different services had been providing different information in the first stages of localization. For example, different groups in June provided different estimates of the radioactivity that had escaped the fourth block. In another instance, the Geochem Institute had provided a report approved by academician Velikov that was based on their measurements that more than 50% of the reactor's contents had escaped its core in the Chernobyl power plant territory. They had estimated a colossal plutonium spreading zone on the territory of the Soviet Union. The second group of specialists, who was working under the instruction of Lev Dmitrievich Rybaev, consisted of Radiation Institute staff of the Ministry of Media Machine Building. The group was measuring the activity only in some hydrophysical points around the station, and they estimated the escaped fuel by the activity within their measured points. Of course, this was wrong. The self-absorption was not taken into account, as well as many other factors. But nevertheless, judging by this basic overview, they also had concluded that around half of the fuel was inside the reactor and another half had escaped. Finally, the third group of specialists, which in the most thorough way had researched all the maps from the government hydrometric service, integrated all the activity from land-based and air services, comparing that to the data that was received from abroad. They could not get any more than 3 or 4% of radioactivity that had escaped the fourth block. All this information was accumulated in my subgroup and had practical effect on what actions and effort should be assigned to the contamination and disposal works. Because of these differences, a commission had to be formed, and Anatoly Petrovich was asked to be an arbitrator to search for mistakes. In the end, it appeared that the Geochem group was wrong, because their samples were taken in such conditions that they had included plutonium used in weapons coming from nuclear explosion period. These inaccuracies were accounted for, but that approach itself was not accurate. Eventually, all came to the following number: between 3% to 4% of the fuel was thrown out of the first block reactor. But during that period, it created quite a tense situation. The operative group itself, however, didn't show any tension at all. They just constantly performed more measurements, more elaborations, and tried their best to understand the actual conditions. During this time, the operative group was constantly trying to provide maximum protection for the people, and judging from possible degrees of contamination, decided on a compensation amount that would be necessary for the evacuees. I repeat that, and I personally was a witness to that. They made many decisions, specifically to help people who were affected by this accident. This is true for each and any case. Another thing that surprised me about the operative group is that it never tried to be secretive about their decisions. For example, decisions of some sort were taken, like the launch date of the first and second blocks, or a sarcophagus completion time, or works on the 5th or 6th blocks, or Pripyat conservation decisions. Such decisions were adopted, but if some experimental data appeared that showed that the conservation of Pripyat could be avoided, and it could be decontamination and even inhabited later, then the operative would change their decisions according to the new data without seeing something bad in that change.